Most people finish a book and remember almost nothing. Sound familiar? The problem isn't your memory, it's your method.
Hello and welcome. We are so proud to have you here. I'm Sophie.
And I'm David. It is genuinely wonderful to have you here with us today. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, thank you for pressing play.
Before we get into what I think is one of the most genuinely useful conversations we've had on this podcast, a quick and warm request. If you're enjoying these episodes, please subscribe to the channel right now. It's completely free and it means you'll never miss a new lesson. A like on the video helps us reach more English learners around the world who need exactly this kind of conversation.
And we have a question for you today. A question we want you to answer honestly in the comments section below. Here it is. Think of the last book or article you read in English. How much of it do you actually remember right now? Write your answer below. We read every single comment and we'd love to hear from you. And if you know someone who loves reading but struggles to retain what they read, please share this episode with them. It could genuinely change the way they read.
Right, today's topic. David, be honest with me. Have you ever finished a book, put it down, felt satisfied, and then a week later realized you couldn't remember a single argument, a single character arc, a single key idea from the whole thing?
Embarrassingly, yes. More times than I'd like to admit. I remember the feeling of reading it. I remember the general mood of the book, but the specific content, the ideas I was so certain would stay with me, gone.
And this experience is so common, it almost seems normal. People finish books, take courses, read articles, attend lectures, and retain a remarkably small fraction of what they encountered.
Research in cognitive psychology suggests that within 1 week of reading something, the average person retains as little as 10 to 20% of the content. Without any intentional retention strategy, the rest simply fades.
Which, when you stop to think about it, is rather extraordinary. You invest hours of your time and attention into reading something, and the vast majority of it disappears almost immediately, like pouring water into a leaking bucket.
And for English learners specifically, this matters doubly. Because reading in English is not just an opportunity to absorb ideas and information. It is one of the richest and most effective ways to develop your vocabulary, your grammatical intuition, your sense of natural expression. And if you're not retaining what you read, you're losing not just the content, but the language as well.
So today we're going to tackle this problem directly. We'll explain exactly why most people retain so little of what they read. And then we'll go through the most effective, evidence-based strategies for changing that, completely, starting today.
And I want to say from the outset, this is not about reading more slowly, or reading fewer books, or spending hours taking elaborate notes. The strategies we're discussing today are practical, sustainable, and fit naturally into a normal reading life.
Reading more isn't the answer. Reading smarter is.
Before we get to the solutions, I think it's worth spending a little time understanding why forgetting happens in the first place. Because once you understand the mechanism, the strategies make much more intuitive sense.
The starting point is a concept called passive reading. And I'd argue that most people, most of the time, read passively. They move their eyes across the page, the words enter their mind, and they experience the sensation of reading. But very little active cognitive processing is happening.
It's a bit like listening to music while you're doing something else. The music is there. You're aware of it. You might even enjoy it. But you're not really listening. You're not processing the melody, the harmony, the lyrics. It's just pleasant background noise.
Passive reading is the cognitive equivalent of that. The words wash over you. You turn the pages. You reach the end. And because you never deeply engaged with the material, the brain has very little to hold on to.
And this connects to a principle in cognitive psychology called the levels of processing effect, which we've touched on in previous episodes in relation to vocabulary. The deeper you process information, the more you think about it, question it, connect it, engage with it emotionally, the more strongly and durably it is encoded in memory.
Shallow processing, reading the words without engaging critically, produces weak, short-lived memories. Deep processing, asking questions, making connections, forming opinions, summarizing in your own words, produces strong, lasting memories.
The second factor is something called the illusion of knowing. When you read something that feels familiar or that confirms ideas you already hold, your brain produces a feeling of understanding. A sense of, yes, I know this, I've got it.
But that feeling is often misleading. Understanding something in the moment of reading is very different from having actually encoded and stored that information in a way you can later retrieve. The feeling of comprehension is not the same as genuine retention.
And passive reading, moving through familiar ideas without actively testing your understanding, generates a lot of that illusion of knowing. You feel like you've learned something. You haven't. You've experienced something. That's different.
The third factor is the absence of retrieval practice. Cognitive science has established very clearly that the most powerful way to strengthen a memory is not to reread the material, but to retrieve it, to actively recall it without looking at the source.
Every time you successfully retrieve a piece of information from memory, every time you think it through without referring to the text, the neural pathway associated with that memory becomes stronger and more durable.
Whereas rereading, which is what most people do when they want to review something, is relatively ineffective for long-term retention. It feels productive, it feels like learning, but it mostly just refreshes the illusion of knowing without actually strengthening the underlying memory.
Understanding these three factors, passive reading, the illusion of knowing, and the absence of retrieval practice, makes the solutions very clear. You need to read actively. You need to test your understanding honestly, and you need to practice retrieval.
The first and perhaps most fundamental strategy is something we touched on in the hook at the beginning of today's episode. Read with intention. And this sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but in practice, very few people actually do it.
What does reading with intention mean? It means that before you open a book or an article, you take 60 seconds, just 60 seconds, to ask yourself one question. What do I actually want to get from this?
Not, what is this book about? Not, is this book well reviewed? But, what specifically do I want to understand, learn, or take away from this reading session?
And that question, answered honestly and specifically before you begin, does something remarkable to your reading. It gives your brain a filter, a purpose, a reason to pay attention to certain things over others.
Because the brain is extraordinarily good at finding what it's looking for. If you begin reading with a clear question in mind, your attention will naturally orient itself toward information that answers that question. You will notice things you would have skimmed past in a passive reading.
Think of it like arriving at a party. If you walk in with no particular purpose, you'll probably just drift, talk to whoever happens to be nearby, leave without having had any particularly memorable conversations. But if you walk in with a specific intention, I want to meet 3 new people tonight, or I want to have one really meaningful conversation, your behavior changes entirely.
Reading is the same. A clear intention focuses your cognitive resources. It transforms you from a passive recipient of information into an active seeker of it.
And this is especially powerful for English learners, because your reading intention might be both content-based and language-based. You might say, I want to understand the author's main argument about climate policy. But you might also say, I want to notice how this writer uses complex sentences, or I want to find 3 new expressions I've never encountered before.
Dual intention, content and language simultaneously. That kind of active, purposeful engagement with a text is one of the richest forms of English practice available to any learner.
The second strategy is one that feels slightly uncomfortable at first, but produces dramatic results almost immediately. It's called the pause and summarize method.
The principle is simple. Every few pages, or at the end of every chapter if the chapters are short, you close the book, put it face down, and try to summarize in your own words what you've just read.
Not copying sentences from the text, not looking at your notes, just what were the main ideas in those pages? What did I just learn? What was the author arguing? What surprised me?
And the crucial phrase there is in your own words. Because translating something from the author's language into your own language is not a passive act. It is a genuine test of comprehension. You cannot summarize something accurately in your own words if you didn't actually understand it.
Which is uncomfortable, because this is where the illusion of knowing gets exposed. You thought you understood those pages. You close the book, try to summarize them, and discover you can only recall a vague general impression. The specifics have already gone.
And that moment of discovery, uncomfortable as it is incredibly valuable, because it tells you exactly where to direct your attention. Go back, reread those passages more carefully, and try again.
For English learners, this technique has an additional powerful benefit. When you summarize what you've read in English, either aloud or in writing, you are practicing exactly the kind of spontaneous language production that develops real fluency. You are using vocabulary you've just encountered in new combinations to express your own understanding. That is extraordinarily rich language practice.
And the speaking version of this, closing the book and summarizing out loud to yourself, as if explaining to a friend what you've just read, is particularly powerful. It trains both your comprehension and your spoken English simultaneously.
5 minutes of that kind of active engagement is worth more than another hour of passive rereading.
Strategy 3, and this one is supported by decades of research in cognitive science. Connect new information to something you already know.
The brain is not a filing cabinet where information gets stored in neat, separate folders. It's more like a web, an intricate network of interconnected ideas, experiences, feelings, and memories. And new information sticks most effectively when it has multiple strong connections to existing parts of that web.
This is why people remember stories better than lists of facts. Stories connect to emotions, to human experience, to things we already understand about how people behave and how the world works. A dry list of unrelated facts has no connections to anchor it, and so it floats free and quickly disappears.
So when you encounter a new idea while reading, actively search for connections. Ask yourself, where have I seen something like this before? How does this relate to something I already believe or know? Does this confirm, challenge, or complicate my existing understanding?
Even a single strong connection between a new idea and an existing memory dramatically increases the likelihood of retaining it. The brain essentially has 2 anchor points now instead of 1, and the new information is much harder to lose.
For English learners, this principle extends directly to vocabulary. When you encounter a new word in your reading, don't just note the definition. Ask, what other words does this remind me of? What situations from my own life could I use this word in? Have I heard a similar word in another language?
The more connections you create, the more the word becomes embedded in your existing language network, rather than sitting in isolation, waiting to be forgotten.
Strategy 4. And I want to be specific about this because I think most people either don't take notes when they read or take notes in a way that isn't particularly effective.
The ineffective way, writing down long quotes and passages from the book, highlighting sentences that feel important, copying the author's words in a different place. This feels productive, but it's mostly just transcription, a relatively shallow cognitive activity.
The effective way, writing your reactions, your questions, and your own reformulations of the ideas. The key test is, are these notes in your words or in the author's words?
Your own words means you've processed the idea. The author's words means you've copied the idea. Only one of those builds durable memory. A very simple but remarkably effective note-taking approach is what some people call the 3-column method. You divide a page into 3 sections. In the first, a brief note of what the author said. In the second, your reaction or question. In the third, a connection to something you already know or believe.
3 columns. Author's idea, your reaction, your connection. Working through those 3 columns for the most important passages in a book forces exactly the kind of deep, active processing that builds lasting memory.
And the notes themselves become a valuable resource. Because unlike the book, which is full of the author's language, your notes are full of your language, your thoughts, your connections, your questions. And that personal ownership makes them far more memorable than anything you could have highlighted.
The 5th and final strategy is perhaps the most scientifically robust of everything we've discussed today. Spaced repetition. The practice of reviewing material at carefully timed increasing intervals. Here is the core idea. The brain forgets in a predictable pattern, a pattern described by what cognitive scientists call the forgetting curve. Without any review, you lose the majority of new information within the first few days. But each time you review, before the memory has fully faded, the rate of forgetting slows considerably.
So reviewing your notes one day after reading, then 3 days later, then a week later, then a month later, each review at increasing intervals produces dramatically stronger long-term retention than reading something once and never returning to it.
And the review doesn't have to be long. 5 or 10 minutes of actively recalling the main ideas from your notes, without looking at the book, is far more effective than rereading the chapter.
The retrieval attempt is what matters. The effort of trying to remember, even when it feels effortful and slightly frustrating, is what strengthens the memory. Easy rereading doesn't produce that effect.
For English learners, spaced repetition is equally powerful for the vocabulary you encounter in your reading. Reviewing new words not immediately, not once, but at spaced intervals. Each time actively trying to recall the word's meaning and usage before checking your notes, produces the kind of deep, durable vocabulary knowledge that actually transfers into your speaking and writing.
There are digital tools, Anki is the most widely used, that automate the spaced repetition process for vocabulary. You add words and their contexts, and the app schedules your reviews automatically, showing you each word at the optimal moment, just before you're about to forget it.
But even without any technology, a simple system of dated review notes, where you revisit your reading notes at 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, and 1 month, will produce a dramatic improvement in how much you retain.
Let's bring everything together. Because we've covered a lot today, and I want it all to feel completely clear and manageable.
The reason most people retain so little of what they read is not a memory problem. It is a method problem. Passive reading, the illusion of knowing, and the absence of retrieval practice, these are the culprits. And each of them has a direct solution.
Read with intention. Give your brain a clear purpose before you begin. Pause and summarize regularly. Close the book and test your understanding in your own words. Connect new information to what you already know. Anchor new ideas firmly in your existing web of knowledge. Take smart notes, in your own words, with your reactions and connections. And review at spaced intervals. Retrieve actively rather than rereading passively.
These 5 strategies together transform reading from a passive, absorptive experience into an active, generative one. You are no longer a vessel that fills and empties. You are a builder, constructing something that lasts.
And for English learners specifically, these strategies don't just improve retention. They transform reading into one of the most powerful English practice tools available. Every reading session becomes simultaneously an exercise in comprehension, vocabulary, grammar, and active expression.
Reading more isn't the answer. Reading smarter is. And you now have exactly the tools to do that.
Today's phrase, and it is beautifully fitting, to get to grips with something. It means to begin to understand and deal effectively with something complex or difficult. You might say, it took me a while to get to grips with spaced repetition, but now I use it every day. Or, I'm gradually getting to grips with this new reading method.
To get to grips with something, start using that today.
Before we go, our question for the comments. Think of the last book or article you read in English. How much of it do you actually remember right now? And after today, which of these 5 strategies are you going to try first? Tell us below. We genuinely want to know.
Please subscribe if you haven't already. New episodes every week, completely free. A like on the video helps more learners find us. And please share this with anyone who loves reading but struggles to hold on to what they read.
From both of us, thank you so much for being here. Read smarter. Your future self will thank you.
See you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.